Hello friends, I dressed up for this very special video today. As you can see, me wearing my very professional bow tie here. I dressed up because in today's video, I'm going to be talking about boys becoming men and the teenager feelings that they feel along those lines. If you hadn't guessed, I grew up from boyhood to manhood. And here I am sitting as a 22-year-old wearing a gimmicky shirt on a YouTube channel so you can figure out how much of a man I truly am at this point in my life. But in today's episode, we're going to be talking about back in 1957, what Evelyn Millis Duvall, also known as the woman, the myth, the legend, back in the day, said about teenagers that are boys growing up, growing into their feelings, and what it's like for them. And we're gonna see if we can learn anything from it today. So if you're a boy like me, let's stick around and see if Miss Evelyn Millis Duvall back in 1957 really had us boys figured out. And if you're a girl, you might as well stick around because you might learn a few things that might help you with your man. So without further ado, with bow tie and all, this is Love Stories with Grady. Ayo, welcome to another episode of Love Stories with Grady. I'm your host, Grady Wyzoric, and I'm a 22-year-old boy who has never dated a girl longer than 22 hours. And I'm reading through this magical book from 1957 in order to learn a few things that may help me down the road to date a girl for 23 hours at the very least, the next time I date a girl. Before we get into this video, be sure to subscribe below in order to get more notifications for when these videos are upcoming so you can learn a little bit more about how you can improve your love stories in your life. So this chapter that I was reading talks about the development of boys, and I promised in my first video that I would be reading every single chapter in this book and commentating on it. We're going to go off the beaten path a little bit. I'm not going to learn too much about girls through reading a chapter on boys and having a relationship with them, but I did notice a few things that are important for girls to know about boys. And so I'm going to read those off in today's video. So if you're a girl watching this, take out your notepad, get that pen ready, and get ready to get rolling. So one of the first things that is talked about in this chapter, which I thought was pretty interesting, and boys, you might relate, it talked about how is a fellow to know. And so what it was talking about is that in society, whether it was back in 1957 or in 2021, usually talking about growth and developments and how a man loves a woman and a woman loves a man. Sometimes that is taboo topics for adults and leaders to talk about with children. It talks about in this book how society usually looks at boys and looks at, all right, they're the man's and they are totally into intimacy with a partner and different things along those lines. And it was talking about, all right, no one really ever sits down and tells a boy, here's the facts of intimacy, here's how it works, and more than that, here's the purpose of intimacy and things along those lines. And it talks about usually when the boy is young, adults are like, all right, well, the boy doesn't need to know this yet, it's not necessarily time. But then over time, the adults start getting into the mentality of, oh, the boy probably already knows this, the boy naturally just knows these things, the boy knows the answers to all questions about intimacy with a partner and things along those lines. Where it's like, all right, if the boy's not taught, that's not necessarily true. And so the book says in society, sometimes a boy is supposed to know about intimacy and love with a girl without ever being told. And it's a whole different video to discuss, all right, when do you talk to a boy about this? When do you talk to a girl about this? What's the right way? What's the best way? And to any parents watching this or anyone who will be parents, I would say it's important to have stage-by-stage discussions with your child over time and just know that they have a lot of questions. I've studied in the past how cultures handle the topic of intimacy with partners, and usually when the parents are a lot more open about it, even talking about things like that over the kitchen table, sure, the kid may roll their eyes, sure, the kids might be like grossed out, but the fact that it's less taboo in the household actually makes for a lot better conversations and open conversations. And so that's a very interesting aspect that I've learned, not necessarily from this book, but that this book kind of pointed to. So this is a quote from page 30 of this book. It says, "Many boys don't ask questions because they either assume they're either supposed to know the answers already, or they shouldn't be asking the questions yet. And so they're in this middle ground, and I feel like everyone can relate to that. So another interesting thing that I found in this chapter was last video we talked about old myths for girls, and one of the myths for guys in regards to intimacy. I'm saying intimacy because YouTube doesn't like me saying another word that I'm not going to say that starts with S and ends with X and has one vowel in the middle. A false myth about boys is that back in 1957, some people actually believed that in order for a boy to naturally develop, he needed to start having intimacy from an early age. So in his teenage years, in order to become a man, they said, all right, he needs to start having intimacy. And so obviously that's untrue from a biological standpoint. A lot of these chapters, this chapter and the last chapter, I didn't even really tackle it much, but for both boys and girls, Evelyn Millis Duvall back in 1957 was talking about the biology aspects of both men and women, and I thought it was very interesting how it was laid out in the book. I think it was done with class, but at the same time, I just can't imagine writing something like that myself. I have no interest being a biology teacher. So if you have questions about the biology of men or women, consult with your parents or a really good mentor. This was interesting. I learned this. So girls, you might really want to know this. Why does a boy's voice crack sometimes? That's a good question. The reason a boy's voice cracks during a certain period of his life is either because A, nervous tension, B, anger, C, embarrassment, or 4, externally trying to be very calm when inside the boy is literally seething with anger. And I thought D was a very funny one to add in there for why a boy's voice cracks. But as all of you know, you've probably heard young teenage boys get in arguments, and that's when their voice cracks. So, girls, it is important for you to know if a boy's voice cracks around you, that he may be very nervous about his discussion with you. So this book started pointing out, all right, a boy can be moody in his young age, he can be stormy with his parents at a young age. And it was kind of interesting to me that they didn't necessarily bring this into the girl chapter, but they specifically focused on this in the boy chapter. From my understanding, girls still have that stormy period when they're growing up as well. But maybe just because of the testosterone aspect of boys, they're stormy. So if you're a young girl and you're either a teenager, or if you're dating a boy in your young adult age, or in your mid-30s or mid-40s and you're watching this, if your boy is stormy with you, it is likely because he is either going through puberty, if he's young, or B, if he's older, he just hasn't eaten a taco recently and he really needs to eat a taco in order to chill out his internal organs from just being super aggressive. The book also talks about the special feelings a young boy has towards a girl, and when he's growing up, he's budding with maturity and he starts having these feelings towards girls and whatever. And that's not always the case, you know, that doesn't necessarily happen with everyone, but I thought this part was funny, and so I'm going to read it out loud to you. As a boy gets into his teens, he begins to experience new reactions to certain special girls and to the whole male-female relation in general. He may suddenly discover a girl who sets his mind whirling, who occupies his thoughts day after day, whose slightest glance is heaven, whose handwriting makes the shivers run up and down his spine, whose touch is exquisite pain and pleasure in a strange new combination. Whether this may be some new girl who has just moved into town, or the same girl he played games with as a kid, his feelings about her are new and strange. When I was younger, I had what I call the premature discontentment of desire, which means that I was literally so young, like early teens, but I had like strong desires to get married. And so it was a really weird, like, all right, this is what I want, but I'm not old enough for this at all yet. It was a weird phenomenon, and I understood how weird it was when I was younger, and I knew that other people were experiencing it as well. But it is weird, as this book points out, to have that desire before it actually makes sense to act upon that desire, you know? Another thing that I found really interesting was the fact that it's talking about lovey-dovey aspects and the shiver going up your spine when you read her handwriting, and when you see her across the room, you swoon. You know, it's interesting to me that this was all in the boy chapter and they didn't cover this at all in the girl maturing chapter. And usually when you hear those things, you assume that's what the girl is experiencing about the guy. I don't know really what to make of it. If you have any ideas why it was so focused on for the guy rather than the girl, you can comment below and help me theorize that. The book also talks about how boys need to really have self-control when it comes to their feelings, whether it's they want to be dating someone or they want to have intimacy with someone. And here's one of the things I want to say to boys. So if you're a boy, if you're a male, if you're a teenager, if you're a young adult, if you're literally an 80-year-old man sitting in a nursing home watching this, let me tell you this one thing. It is important for you to have self-control in regards to your feelings. Just because you have a feeling that you want to do something doesn't mean that you have a right to do it, and doesn't mean that you should act on it, and doesn't mean that the other person wants it just as much as you. So literally just chill out and take things slow. This chapter also talks about figuring out yourself when you're a teen, and I thought this was really interesting. So this might teach you a little bit about yourself if you are a teenager watching this, and if you're an adult watching this, it might help you figure out a little bit more about why you are the way you are as an adult. So it says, these tasks of growing up go on through the teen years in a complexity of bewilderments, trials, and practicing. Boys who have someone to confide in, someone to share their deep anxieties with and their highest dreams with, someone who understands without scoffing or ridiculing, these boys find that moody spells are not so baffling after all. Here's why I say that. If you're feeling super moody at whatever age you are and you're not quite sure what's going on, you should literally just start talking to someone. Talk to someone you trust, talk to someone who can be there for you. Make sure that there's someone who's going to listen to you and walk you through whatever is going on, because that is extremely valuable. Finally, in this section, it talks about boys try to find their identity in girls of, oh, this person likes me, or oh, this person likes me. And this actually applies for girls finding their identity in boys as well. This book really talks about the importance of not doing that. It says what we really need to figure out is who we are ourselves. And then once we know who we are ourselves, we can then naturally pair ourselves up with someone who's a lot better fit for us. Here's the deal. Boys and girls, you know, they both mature differently and their bodies develop differently. Some of the ways they're developed in society is different, but both boys and girls yearn for a lot of the same things. They yearn for who they're going to end up with, and they yearn to figuring themselves out. And what this book talks about is first you got to figure out who you are yourself as you're maturing in order to figure out who you're going to end up with. That is important to know, but I would say as a 22-year-old boy who has never dated a girl longer than 22 hours, I would say the biggest lesson that came out of this for me is understanding why my voice used to crack. It's really critical in understanding voice cracks to getting the girl of your dreams. Keep the voice cracks to a minimum. All right, so that's a wrap, folks. If you would like to comment below on the biggest thing you've either learned as a boy about yourself growing up, or girls, I'd love to hear from you about what you've learned from boys from afar and things that you may have learned about boys in this video. Be sure to give this video a big thumbs up and check out all my other details in my bio below. And until next time, I hope you have a good night.